I'm 102 years old. I've welded steel on buildings so tall you couldn't see the sidewalk. I took shrapnel in my left hip at Chosin Reservoir and walked home on a leg the doctor said would never bend again. I raised 3 children and buried one. And the hardest thing I ever did, harder than the war, harder than the steel, harder than the burying, was loving a boy who wasn't mine and never letting him see me flinch. My name is Earl. I need to tell you about my son, Robert, because what happened between us is the thing I'm proudest of and the thing that keeps me up at 3 in the morning, both at the same time. And I'm running out of nights to sort out which one weighs more. To understand Robert, you'd have to understand his mother first. You'd have to understand what Chicago looked like in 1953 to a 24-year-old man fresh off a troop ship with a Purple Heart and a limp and no earthly idea what to do next. I grew up on the South Side, Bronzeville. My father was a Pullman porter, rode the trains from Chicago to Los Angeles and back, pressing white men's shirts and smiling at jokes that weren't funny. He did it for 31 years, never complained, not once. My mother took in laundry and sang hymns while she ironed. The house smelled like starch and lavender, and something deeper underneath, the particular scent of people working too hard for too little and refusing to let it make them bitter. I was the youngest of 4. My brothers went to the steel mills. My sister married a preacher and moved to Gary. I joined the Army in 1950 because a recruiter at the barber shop told me I'd see the world. He was right about that. I saw Korea. I saw frozen mud and dead boys, and a hillside so cold your teeth cracked if you breathed through your mouth. I was 19. I came home in '52 with a limp and a quietness that my mother noticed but didn't push on. She'd set a plate in front of me and touch the back of my neck and walk away. That woman understood silence better than any chaplain I ever met. I got a job at Wisconsin Steel, ironwork. The foreman took one look at my limp and put me on ground-level fabrication. I told him I could climb. He said, "Prove it," so I did. Within a year, I was walking beams 40 stories up with a welding torch in my hand, and the whole city spread out beneath me like a promise somebody made and half kept. Now, Dolores. I met Dolores Jean Thibodeau at a dance hall on 47th Street in the spring of 1953. She was from New Orleans originally, Creole family, light skin, dark eyes, a voice that sounded like warm water running over smooth stones. She wore a green dress that night. I remember because every other woman in the room was wearing red or blue, and Dolores picked green, like she'd decided ahead of time she wasn't going to compete. She was just going to be different. And she was. We danced 3 songs. I couldn't move well because of the hip, but she didn't mention it. She adjusted, slowed her step to match mine without making it obvious. That told me everything I needed to know about who she was. We courted for 4 months, walked along the lakefront, ate Italian beef sandwiches at a stand on Halsted. She talked and I listened. I was good at listening by then. Korea had burned the small talk out of me, and what was left was a man who paid attention. On our 5th date, she told me she had a son, Robert. He was 2 years old. The father was a man she'd been with in New Orleans, a musician, she said, who played alto saxophone and vanished the week she told him she was pregnant. Packed his horn and his clothes into a DeSoto and drove north and never sent a letter or a dollar. She told me this sitting on a bench in Washington Park. Her hands were folded in her lap and her jaw was set like she was bracing for a hit. She'd told other men before. They'd all walked. I sat there for a minute, looked at the lake, looked at her, and I said, "What's his favorite thing to eat?" She blinked. "What?" "Robert. What does he like to eat? If I'm going to meet him, I should probably bring something he likes." She started crying right there on the bench. Not loud, just tears running down her face while the wind came off the water and blew her hair sideways. I didn't touch her. I didn't say anything wise. I just sat there and let her cry, because sometimes that's the only honest thing you can do. Robert was a small boy with enormous brown eyes and his mother's cheekbones. The first time I walked into Dolores's apartment, he was sitting on the kitchen floor, banging a wooden spoon on a pot lid. He looked up at me and said, "Big man." 2 words. I was finished. Done. That boy owned me from that moment, and he didn't even know it. We married in August of 1954. Small ceremony. My mother came. Dolores's aunt came up from Louisiana. Robert wore a little bow tie that he pulled off before the vows were finished. I adopted him legally 6 months later. Signed the papers at the county clerk's office on a Tuesday morning. The clerk asked if I understood what I was signing. I said I did. She said, "This makes him yours." And I said, "He was already mine. This is just the paperwork." Now here's the part that's harder to say. I loved Robert, from the wooden spoon onward. But love and biology are different animals, and sometimes they sleep in the same bed and sometimes they don't. Our daughters came after, Patricia in 56 and Janelle in 59. My blood, my face looking back at me from the bassinet. And I caught myself doing something I'm ashamed of even now. I'd look at Patricia's nose and think, "That's my mother's nose." I'd watch Janelle throw a ball and think, "She's got my arm." These little flashes of recognition, genetic echoes. And then I'd look at Robert, his long fingers, his narrow jaw, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. And I'd see a saxophone player from New Orleans I never met. A man who ran. A man who gave up the best thing he'd ever make. I never treated Robert differently. I swear that on my mother's grave. He got the same discipline, the same birthday parties, the same lectures about respect and hard work and keeping your word. But there were moments, private, shameful, fleeting moments, when the difference knocked on a door inside my chest. I'd answer it, look at it, and close the door again. Dolores knew. She always knew. She'd catch me watching Robert sometimes, and her eyes would narrow just slightly. Not angry, not accusing, just watchful. The way a mother watches any threat, even one she loves. We never discussed it. That was our agreement, the unspoken contract of our marriage. I would love this boy as my own. She would never ask me if it was hard. And we'd both pretend the contract wasn't there. Robert grew up strong, smart, stubborn in a way that reminded me of myself, even though he didn't carry a drop of my blood. He played basketball at Dunbar High School, got a scholarship to Illinois State, became an engineer, married a woman named Diane who laughed at his bad jokes the way Dolores laughed at mine. He built a good life, a solid, honest, decent life. And he never knew. That's the part that aged me faster than the steel mills or the war. The secret. Not the kind of secret that burns, the kind that hums. a low, steady vibration underneath everything. Every Thanksgiving, every Father's Day card. Every time he called me Dad and I heard the word land and felt two things at once, pride and fraud. Both real, both heavy. Dolores died in 1998. Ovarian cancer. She was 68. I held her hand in the hospital room while the machines beeped and the fluorescent lights buzzed, and the world outside went on buying groceries and arguing about parking spots. Her last clear words to me were, "Tell him, Earl. He deserves to know." Then she closed her eyes. I didn't tell him. Not then. I was too gutted, too emptied out. I buried my wife and I sat in our kitchen. The same kitchen where a 2-year-old boy banged a wooden spoon 45 years earlier. And I drank coffee and stared at the wall and decided Dolores was wrong. Some truths are kinder left in the ground. I carried that decision for another 26 years. Then last spring I turned 102. Robert drove in from Springfield with Diane and their 2 grown children, and a grandchild I hadn't met yet. They brought a cake with candles they'd stopped trying to count. We sat in the living room, everybody laughing, grandkids taking pictures. And Robert put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Dad, I hope I'm half the man you are." Something cracked open in me. Right there with the cake and the candles and the baby grabbing at the tablecloth. I looked at this 72-year-old man with his mother's eyes and a stranger's jaw, and I realized Dolores was right. She was always right. He deserved to know. Not because the truth would help him, because the lie, however kind, however necessary, was the last wall between us. And I didn't want to die with a wall still standing. I told him the next morning. Just the 2 of us, coffee at the kitchen table. I told him about the saxophone player, about the DeSoto, about the adoption papers and the county clerk, and the Tuesday morning I signed my name next to his. He didn't speak for a long time, stirred his coffee, looked out the window. Then he said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Since before you were born to me." He said, "Did Mama ask you to tell me?" I said her last words. He set down the spoon, looked at me with those enormous brown eyes. Still enormous at 72, still the same eyes from the kitchen floor. And he said, "You waited 26 years?" I said I was afraid. He said, "Of what?" And I said the truest thing I've ever spoken, that you'd stop calling me Dad. He stood up, walked around the table, put his arms around me, and he said, "Old man, I've been calling you Dad for 70 years. You think a saxophone player from New Orleans is going to change that?" I cried. I don't cry easy. Korea fixed that. The steel fixed that. But I cried at that kitchen table like I was 24 years old again, sitting on a bench in Washington Park, watching a woman in a green dress trust me with the most important thing she had. I'm 102. My hip still aches where the shrapnel went in. My hands are too stiff to hold a welding torch. I can't climb stairs without stopping halfway to catch my breath. But I can tell you this, blood doesn't make a father. Showing up makes a father. Signing the papers makes a father. Biting your tongue when the difference knocks on that door inside your chest, closing it every time, and choosing the boy over the biology. That makes a father. Robert calls me every Sunday. Still says Dad. Still means it. And the hum, that low vibration that lived underneath everything for 70 years. It's quiet now. Not gone, just quiet. Like a machine somebody finally turned off in a room you'd forgotten was noisy. Dolores was right. The truth didn't break us. The wall was the thing that was breaking us. I just couldn't see it because I'd been leaning against it for so long, I thought it was holding me up. If you're carrying a secret that's shaped like protection, look again. It might be shaped like a wall. And the people on the other side might be strong enough to hear what you haven't said. Robert is. He always was. I just needed 70 years and a melted birthday cake to figure that out. Dolores would have laughed at me for taking so long. She'd have been right about that, too.